And yeah, you will never see Dillon Danis at a UFC fight ever again.
Dillon Danis has officially been banned from attending UFC events for life. And the way it all unfolded is one of the wildest behind-the-scenes stories the promotion has ever seen. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't minor drama. This was an all-out explosion that turned an entire section of the arena into a battlefield. To understand why Dana White made such a drastic decision, we need to break down exactly what happened and how everything spiraled out of control in a matter of seconds. It all started when Dillon Danis unexpectedly ended up right beside Islam Makhachev's circle. Members of the same Dagestani crew he and Conor McGregor's team had clashed with years ago during the infamous UFC 229 chaos. Nobody knows if it was coincidence or just bad luck, but Danis being shoulder to shoulder with the people he's been verbally attacking online for years was already a recipe for disaster. Witnesses say the tension was immediate. There were stares, smirks, and a few sarcastic comments thrown around. But things escalated fast when Danis began chirping at Magomedchenko, one of the Dagestani fighters in Islam's entourage, and Abubakar Nurmagomedov, who has his own history of bad blood with McGregor's team. The talking quickly turned personal. Voices got louder. Security began moving closer, sensing something was about to go wrong. And then it happened. In the span of a heartbeat, the entire situation detonated. What started as a verbal dispute suddenly became a full-blown, violent altercation. A punch was thrown. Nobody can agree who threw the first one. And the entire section erupted into chaos. Chairs flew into the air, drinks splashed across rows of spectators. Fans scrambled to get out of the way as bodies collided and toppled into seating. Security officers sprinted toward the scene, but they were completely overwhelmed. This wasn't a fight. This was a brawl. A multi-person, uncontrolled eruption of pure aggression. People who had nothing to do with the feud were shoved aside as green shirt security and event staff desperately tried to create space. Sorry to interrupt, bro, but I truly want to hear your opinion. If our content feels good to you, please comment your thoughts. We're facing low subscriptions lately, and your support means the world. Please subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Right in the eye of the storm was Dillon Danis. Reports from people sitting within feet of the altercation said Danis was targeted immediately. Magomedchenko broke through the initial security barrier and went straight at him. The two collided with full force. Fists were thrown. Others jumped in. Danis tried to defend himself, swinging back, grabbing, pushing, but he was outnumbered and outpositioned from the start. The brawl spilled across multiple rows as Chenko and others landed blows amid the chaos. Fans later posted shaky footage online, showing Danis taking several heavy shots before security finally managed to pry the fighters apart. By the time the situation was under control, Danis looked shaken, battered, and furious. But the real consequences came afterward. Backstage, Dana White reviewed the footage. He spoke to the arena's head of security, members of the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and UFC staff who witnessed the chaos firsthand. And according to sources, White was furious, not just about the fight, but about the repeated pattern of Dillon Danis attracting chaos wherever he goes. This wasn't the first time Danis had been involved in ugly confrontations. His connection to Conor McGregor's corner during the UFC 229 riot, his controversies in Bellator, his social media feuds that frequently spill into real-life altercations. For Dana White, this latest incident was simply confirmation of what he had already suspected. Dillon Danis was a liability. And so, the decision was made. Dana White issued a blunt, unequivocal ruling. Dillon Danis is banned for life from attending UFC events. Not as a fighter, not as a guest, not as a spectator, not even with a ticket purchased like a normal fan. He is permanently prohibited from entering any venue hosting a UFC event. It's one of the most severe penalties ever handed down in UFC history, especially for someone who has never actually fought for the organization. But as White later explained, the UFC doesn't need the chaos, the fights, the social media firestorms, or the backstage headaches. Wherever Dillon Danis goes, drama follows, and the UFC is officially done with it.
And yeah, you will never see Dillon Danis at a UFC fight ever again.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's wanted badly to come in this company, and he said you guys don't want to sign him because he makes too much trouble.
Dillon Danis is easily the most unusual and unexpected entry on this entire list, because he earned one of the rarest punishments in UFC history without ever once stepping inside the octagon. Unlike every other fighter we've discussed, Danis never signed a UFC contract, never walked out under the bright lights with Bruce Buffer announcing his name, and never had the chance to compete against the world's best mixed martial artists. And yet, somehow, he still managed to get himself banned, not only from fighting in the UFC, but from attending UFC events altogether. It's a bizarre and almost unbelievable scenario, but it fits perfectly with the chaotic energy that has followed Dillon Danis for years. For a long time, Danis pushed relentlessly to get Dana White's attention. On paper, he had qualities that normally attract interest from UFC matchmakers. He is a legitimate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, widely respected for his grappling skill. He gained fame as one of Conor McGregor's primary training partners during McGregor's rise, which placed Danis under a global spotlight before he had even fought professionally. And despite a limited MMA career, he maintained an undefeated record across 3 fights, 2 wins in Bellator, and another victory on a Misfits event. All of this should have made him an interesting prospect. But for Dana White, something about Dillon Danis never quite fit. Whether it was his constant trash-talking, his tendency to manufacture drama, or the social media controversies he surrounded himself with, Danis always carried a level of chaos that didn't align with the UFC's image. Every time his name came up, every time he tried to push for a contract, White seemed uninterested. While other fighters talked their way into opportunities, Danis talked himself out of them. The final turning point came at UFC 322, where Danis wasn't fighting. He was simply attending as a spectator, but even in the crowd, trouble found him. During the event, a sudden cage-side altercation broke out, and in typical Dillon Danis fashion, he ended up right in the center of the chaos. The exact details remain unclear, and eyewitness accounts vary, but what mattered most to Dana White was the pattern. Wherever Danis went, trouble followed. After the event, Dana White made his position brutally clear. Dillon Danis was banned for life, not just from competing in the UFC, but from entering any arena where a UFC event was being held. White stated plainly that Danis brought unnecessary controversy, instability, and negative attention. 3 things the UFC had absolutely no interest in dealing with, especially for someone who hadn't even fought for the promotion. This leaves Danis in a truly unique position. At 32 years old, with real grappling credentials and an undefeated 3-0 record, he will likely continue fighting in smaller organizations, but he will always carry a strange and infamous distinction: the fighter banned by the UFC without ever being part of it. A man whose name the UFC viewed as more trouble than talent, and a career defined more by controversy than by combat. He never competed in the UFC, yet Dillon Danis still earned himself a lifetime ban. More fighters have been banned in UFC history. One punch after the bell erased Paul Daly's title dreams forever. Renato Sobral refused to release a choke, leaving David Heath completely unconscious. And that's only the beginning. Just 3 of the 10 fighters who crossed Dana White and paid for it with their careers: Conor's team versus Khabib's team. UFC 229 was already one of the most emotionally charged fight nights in MMA history. But what happened after the final bell turned the entire event into a global spectacle. The rivalry between Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov was more than a championship fight. It was a clash fueled by months of insults, personal attacks, religious references, national pride, and a bus incident that had shaken the sport months earlier. By the time they stepped into the octagon, tension filled every inch of the arena. Nobody, however, could have predicted what was about to unfold, especially the chaotic role played by Conor McGregor's training partner, Dillon Danis. The fight itself was dominated by Khabib. Round after round, he imposed his grappling pressure, his relentless pace, and finally, in the 4th round, he secured a neck crank that forced McGregor to tap. Years of rivalry and emotional buildup converged into a single moment of victory for Khabib. But instead of celebrating, the champion immediately turned his attention outside the cage, toward Dillon Danis, who had been in McGregor's corner, had been jawing with Khabib throughout the fight. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and emotions boiled over. The instant McGregor tapped, Khabib leapt over the cage in a move that shocked millions watching around the world. In one explosive motion, he flew toward the Irishman's corner, aiming directly at Dillon Danis. The two collided in a chaotic scramble, unleashing a full-scale brawl on the arena floor. As security and officials scrambled to pull Khabib away from Danis, the chaos escalated further inside the cage. Members of Khabib's team jumped into the octagon, charging toward McGregor. One man threw a punch from behind. Another leaped over the cage and swung at McGregor face to face. Suddenly, the UFC's most anticipated fight had dissolved into a full-blown melee involving both teams. Meanwhile, Danis found himself battling not only Khabib, but other members of the Dagestani champion's entourage. Footage later showed Danis throwing punches back, grappling with security, and getting swarmed in the chaos. For several minutes, the T-Mobile Arena transformed into something closer to a riot than a sporting event. The Nevada State Athletic Commission had to quickly restore order. Khabib was escorted out of the arena without his belt being placed around his waist. McGregor was pulled aside and removed through another tunnel. Danis was separated from Khabib's team and detained temporarily by security. The aftermath was equally explosive. Fines were issued, suspensions were handed out, and months of investigations followed. But Dillon Danis' role became one of the most talked about elements. For some, he was the spark that ignited Khabib's post-fight rage. For others, he was simply caught up in the storm, created by one of the most intense rivalries in MMA history. Either way, his involvement cemented his reputation as a magnet for conflict, a label that would follow him for years, eventually contributing to the UFC. Banning him from events entirely, UFC 229 will forever be remembered for the fight outside the cage just as much as the one inside it. And Dillon Danis was right at the center of both. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.